Okay, Zok the Hela Gemara, we're right at the bottom of Taf Chav Gimel Amud Beis. Ki Salak Rav Kahana. When Rav Kahana went to Yisrael, Ash Gechenu Levnei Rab Chia the Yosy V'Karmi. He saw the children of Rab Chia that were sitting, and they were discussing the following halacha. Yisorin Shecholchei. You had the Yisorin Seilah of a mincha, and it was split in half. But V'hinichoi B'visa. So you had two half Yisarins of Silas sitting in one Klei Sharis. B'nogot full yoim be'echad mehen. And its full yoim touched one of these two little piles of flour. Mahu, is it as if it touched both of them? And therefore, they'll both be tummy. Now, the question here is, if the two pieces are touching, well, if you touch A, when A becomes Tameh, well then A will transmit that Tumah to B. However, that's only if the type of Tumah that was given to A can go to B. For instance, if A became a Rishon L'Tumah, then B can become a Sheni L'Tumah. Or if A became a Sheni L'Tumah, then for Kachim, B can become a Shlishi L'Tumah. But what if it was a Tzol Yom who touched it, which only makes it a Shlishi L'Tumah? It only passes. So that can no longer transmit to other flour. So the only way we'll say that both of these piles of flour in the Keli will become Tameh is only if the Baal you touched one pile, the Keli makes it as if you touched the whole pile. So Zok to Gemara Mao. Ki Tanan, this rule that we have, that it says in the Mishnah, Klei Metzaref Masher B'Soichai L'Kodesh. A Keli combines whatever's inside it, makes it into one unit, L'Gabi Kachim. Is that Hanami L'Hechad Nagi Ba'adadi? Is that only if the two pieces are touching? Aval Hechad L'I Nagi Ba'adadi L'I? Or Donu L'I Shno, even if they're two separate piles in a Keli, not touching each other at all, the Keli makes it like it's one piece. Abalu, he answered, Mi Tanan Kli Mechaber. It doesn't say mechaber, which would mean if there's two pieces that are touching, it makes it as if it's one piece. It joins them. It says Klei Metzaref, which means anything inside it is counted as one. Tanan is what it says. Kol Dahu, whatever is there. So that's Poshit the first Shaila. Now we're Poshit another Shaila. Hoshit Echad Levanein. You had a half Yisarin here and half Yisarin there, and then right in the middle you put another half Yisarin that was touching both sides. Mahu, with the half Yisarin, combine them. On the way, the rule is Tzarech L'Kli Kli Metzarefai, Ein Tzarech L'Kli, Ein Kli Metzarefai. If you placed a third half of Yisarin inside, that won't help. You know why? Because the Yisarin Silas makes the mincha. The extra Yisarin is not required for the Klei Sharis because it's more than what's needed for the mincha. As Rashi says, Ein tzarech l'kli k'goyin hai chatzi Yisarin shlishi. This is like a third wheel. Dein tzarech l'kli v'einay mitzaref im elu l'mincha achas. It will not combine with the two first halves of the Yisarin that are there, that are part of the mincha. It's just excess flour. That's not subject to the rule of Klei Metzaref. What about Hoshit Tful Yom es etzpoi beineim? A Tful Yom put his finger in between, but ba'aviron, Rashi says, v'lo naga loy behen v'loy b'chli. He just has his finger in the airspace in between these two piles of flour. Mahu amaru ein loch dover shematalim me'avirei elak lecheres bilvad. Of course, this will not be metama. He didn't touch anything. Only a Klei Cheres is metama ba'avirei. We're talking about a Klei Sharis, which is not made out of cheres, it's made out of gold. Hadar iyu boy minayu. Then he asked him the following shaila: Ma likmois mizeh al zeh. What is the halacha if you never combine the two halves of the mincha? You have half a mincha sitting on one half of the Klei Sharis, you have other half of mincha sitting on the other half of the Klei Sharis, and you made the kmitza from one of the two halves. Is that chal that you made a kmitza from the full Yisarin, from the full mincha? Because the keli is mitzarefit and says that it's one big Yisarin, even though the two half of Yisarin are separated from each other? Do you say tziruf daraisa? If it's the Raisa Avad, it works, and therefore it's one mincha. Or maybe it's only midrabanan, a chumrah, that you tama one if a tumah comes in contact with the other one. But l'kula, to say that it combines it to make it a kosher carbon, if the kmitza was done from one of the two halves, maybe not. I didn't hear a psak about this specific shaila, but I heard a halacha psak about a similar case that maybe will shed light on our case. If you had two menachos that were not yet nikmatz, which is our Mishnah, if there is some area of each of these two menachos that are distinct, where you can make a full kmitza from ksheres, v'mlav psulos. Frag the Gemara, ki yachal likmoitz mia ksheres. If we agree that if there's distinct portions, and you could take an individual kmitza from mincha A and an individual kmitza from mincha B, it'll be kosher. But am I? Hach de ma'ariv ha loy noga. So the Gemara understands that part of the two menachos were joined, and the part that you're making the kmitza from is separated from the pile. So the problem is if you're making kmitza from an area that you know is for sure A, mincha A, that is not connected to the rest of the yisar in mincha A, which is mixed with the rest of the yisar in mincha B. Omer, that's not the case. When you have two combs that are placed together, the teeth of the combs go in between each other. So similar to this as well. You had two Yisraelish that were partially mixed, but they were partially on the edge. So it's like two circles, that part of one circle is over the other circle. We used to learn in school about colors. You had a red circle and a blue circle, and they would make some of the blue circle go over the red circle, and in the middle become green. I think it's blue and red green, or blue and yellow is green, whatever. So that's what it means. Part of it was mixed, but the whole mincha A and the whole mincha B is intact. So that's how it was, and therefore you don't have a raya from here, because here the mincha that you took each kmitza from was all together. Amar Rav Toshma, the Tanya we learned the heirim mimenu. This is a pasuk describing the process of the korban mincha. The heirim mimenu bekumtzoi misol tzaymincha umishamna. So layavi isar b'shnei kelim. Mimenu means you should keep it all in one keli. The entire mincha should be in one keli. V'yikmotz, and then make the kmitza. So it's mashma ha b'chli echad dumya d'shnei kelim kametz. It has to be done in one keli. It can't be in two kelim. But what about if it's one keli, but it's like it's in two kelim, which means it's separated? You couldn't make the kametz. Amalei Abaye lav dafka. You don't have a raya. Maybe dilma shnei kelim haichidami. This is what shnei kelim means, where the pasuk is saying you shouldn't do. Kegoin kapiza bekaba. Kapiza is a smaller measurement than a kav. And Rashi explains what you did is you took a large keli that's the size of a kav, and in it you fashioned another keli that's smaller. So I would envision take a cup and put it into a bowl, but the top of the cup and the top of the bowl will be at the same height. So there, what will happen if you fill up some of the mincha into the cup and some into the bowl? They're not going to touch each other. But above the level of the bowl, above the level of the cup, that's where they'll touch each other. So when it says you shouldn't do it b'shnei kelim, it's shnei kelim where they're touching on top anyway. So there we'll say the avagav the rivi me'iloi, even though above the level of the cup, above the wall of the cup and the bowl, the material is touching each other. Even the mivtzek mechista the kapiza mitaso, since below the level of the walls there's a separation in between the two halves of the mincha. That's the two kelim that we're referring to, that the Torah says is not good, even though they're touching. What would that case be? Would we rather make a dik that it will be kosher? That's Kagoyin Arevis Tarnagolim. And that's a case where the wall of the cup does not extend to the same height as the wall of the keli, rather it's a little lower. So yes, whatever's inside the keli itself, inside the small cup, won't be touching the rest of the flour. But once you get above that level, they're touching and they're still within the airspace of the bowl. So even though towards the lower half, it's separated, but hanagia above it. But if it's not touching at all, there we don't have a raya as to whether or not, if it's in one bowl, if it will be joined. Now there is a very big problem with this pshat in the Gemara. The reason why there's a big problem with this pshat in the Gemara is the Gemara wanted to say, what is Shnei Kelim? What is Shnei Kelim that the Pasuk tells us? It has to be one keli. If you had, I drew a mental picture of a cup inside a bowl, right? If a cup is inside a bowl, and the height of the cup is the same height as the bowl, that means the only place where the two flours join are above the level of the cup and above the level of the bowl. Now we know the halacha is, if you have a bowl with a certain soilus in it for a mincha, and it's heaping, you cannot make your kmitza from the part that's heaping. It's not inside the bowl. The kmitza has to be from inside the bowl. So the Achronim asked, here you're telling me you're making the kmitza from the part that's joined above the bowl, that wouldn't be with kmitza anyway. So that is what they ask on this sugya. Because that's more about it. What happens if you had two half of Yisraelis that were in the bowl? Now we already learned that if a exfoliation touches one, there's tziruf and the other one is also tummy. But what if the chain reaction goes further? You also have a third pile of flour that's not even inside this keli, but there's a trickle of water in between the two. So now the question is, will the trickle of water extend the tumah that came through the tziruf Klei to a third pile of flour that now is connected through the nitzuk? Kiknan Klei Metzaref Masha B'Zoichei L'Kodesh Hanimid Degavei. That tumah is limited to remain within that bowl. Avol Debrei, to extend further out of the bowl. Maybe that would not work. Or maybe you could say, Kivin de Mechaber. Once we say that the two piles that are in the bowl are considered as one, so whenever you have a pile of oichel that's tmeim, and there's nitzich chibur in between, it will connect them.
Think of a case with 100 piles, 5 piles, 7 piles, 3 bowls, 4 bowls.
Yeah.
It's all insane.
Why?
Because.
Two is like electricity.
I know,
It travels.
You can go on forever with all these.
You could.
Right?
Yeah, you could. You could. You have to make a separation. But a little bit speaking to your kasha, Tosfos asks, nitzuk is never a chibur. Nitzuk is not a chibur anywhere. So this that long Tosfos over here. It's not long to have Omid, but he asks, you never find that nitzuk is chibur, even by water. V'davar temahu lemer shemashkin mechaber noichel mechabel tuma l'chaber cherem. It doesn't make any sense. So Tosfos has a problem with this Gemara here. I don't think Tosfos answers it. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. You're going to like the next shaila, because the next shaila stretches it a little further. Look to Gemara, what about if the opposite happened? V'imtim tzarem kiva de mechaber, and it goes on forever. How about chibur mayim v'tziruf Klei v'nogav toyoyim mibachutz? What if the tumah didn't start on the inside, spread to the second, and then through nitzuk we're discussing if it spreads to the third? What if it started outside the bowl in the half of Yisrael, and it only got transmitted to the pile inside the bowl through a nitzuk? Would that be able to continue to the other pile? Do you say Klei Metzaref Masha B'Seichoi if the incoming tumah was only through a nitzuk? Mao Kitnan Klei Metzaref Hanimil Denagam Megavoy, because it's touching on the inside. But tumah being transmitted from external sources. So the tzad that holds it doesn't work holds like you. That it doesn't make sense. It's ain't never safe. What would happen if Yisrael shacholkai? You had an Yisrael and sodas all ready for your mincha, and then you split it in half. V'nitma echad mehen, one of them was tamei, v'nicha bebisa. So here the situation is, we know that if there's two half of Yisrael that are in a keli, and Tful touches one of the two halves, it spreads to both. Right, that we've established already. But now the question is, what if you had a half of Yisrael that was already tamei, independent of anything? Then it was placed into the Klei Sharis, and then a Tful Yom came and touched the part that was already tamei. The question is, do you say will it spread to the second one? So why wouldn't it? So let's analyze it. So break it down into its components. If I had a half of Yisrael that was tamei, and I put it into the bisa, and then there was another half of Yisrael that was placed in, there the tamei doesn't spread. You always a Klei Metzaref if while they're both there, the Tful Yom touches one of the piles, it's as if it touched both piles. But if a Tful Yom touched a half a pile before it was even in the Klei Sharis, then it came in pre-tumah, then the other half came in, that tumah does not spread. That's not a discussion. It won't spread, because only tumah that comes in while they're both together in the bowl do we say goes to both. But here what happened was after you placed one pile that was tumah in the bowl and one pile that was tar in the bowl, a Tful Yom came and touched the pile that was tumah anyway. Do you say, well, now they're together, so therefore it will spread? Or maybe you say, Savalai tumah. You can't make me more tummy. There's no impact of a Tful Yom touching the half that was already tummy. So since it's not having an impact on the actual half Yisrael that the Tful Yom was touching, it does not spread. Oloi. So now the shaila is, once something is tummy, will it be mekabel any more tumah? Now, if it was a tumah chamura, of course it would be mekabel that. But the same tumah of a Tful Yom that it already has, by another Tful Yom touching, once again, a part of the flour that was already touched by Tful Yom, that should not have an impact. That is the Gemara shaila. So Zog the Gemara, Omer le Abaye, Umi Amin and Savel Tumah. Is that a legit argument that once something is Tomei, so if it gets touched with Tumah again, it doesn't absorb anything? I'll prove to you that you don't say that. But now we learned, Sodin Tomei Medrash. You had a piece of fabric that was Tomei Medrash, meaning a Zod stood on it, walked on it. Now that is a Tumah Chamura. That makes a Tomei that if it touches a person, the person will become Tomei, which means it makes it into an Avatuma. So if a Zov steps on a rug, if a Zov steps on a rug, it makes the rug into an Avatuma, and that rug will now be Mitama, a person that touches it. And then they decided that they're making this rug into a curtain, and they hung it up. So now it's no longer a rug anymore. It's no longer something that people step on. Now, something that people don't step on cannot be mitame tumas medrash. So it loses its tumas medrash. But also viloin tor mina medrash. It becomes tor from medrash because it's not tame medrash. The only thing that can become tame medrash is something that you sit on, something that's not meant to sit on or walk on, like a viloin, like a curtain. That is not tame medrash. So that's an interesting way of being a or something. It automatically loses its tumah, because it's no longer a medrash. It's like a keli that you broke. It loses its tumah. Avo tamei maga medrash. But this vilan is tamei because it touched the medrash. Because when it changed states from medrash to non-medrash, it was touching each other. Internally, the pieces were touching each other. That's what the Mishnah says. And Rabbi Yosy argues. Omer Rabbi Yosy, I don't understand. V'chi be'eza medrash nagazeh. This didn't touch a medrash. It was once a medrash, and now it morphed into non-medrash. There was no point in time where you had a medrash and a non-medrash together that were touching each other. Now, the Rishonim explain that there really was, because we do say as the medrus becomes ois medrus, internally the pieces are touching each other. But the problem is, that's called tumas beis hasasarim. The only time touching something makes it tamei is if it's out in the open. If it's an internal touching, like inside your body or inside a beged, that does not transmit tumah. So, Yosy, how is it possible? At what point ever was there an opportunity for tumah to have been transmitted from the medrus to the non-medrus? Ella, therefore, I agree. I disagree. It's not Tomei Maga medrus. It's Torah and Gansen this vilay now. Ella, Shim Naga Ba'azov, Tomei, then it's Maga Hazov. If Azov touched it, then it'll be Maga Hazov. Meaning, if Azov just stood on it, then it's medrus and the medrus is gone. But what if the Zov stood on it and he touched it? So then, this beged had Tumas medrus Azov, and had Tumas Maga Azov. When it became a vilay, it might have lost its Tumas medrus, but it will still retain the Tumah of Maga Azov. But Frank the Gemara, Ki Naga Ba'azov Miyatome. You're telling me it became medrus, and then after it became medrus, Azov touched it, and it'll also absorb the weaker Tumah of Maga Azov. Even if first it became medrus, and it became an Avatuma, then Azov touched it, and now it became only a Rishon Tumah. Isn't that a raya that it could absorb another Tumah, even though it's Tumah already? Am I? Lema Sevele Tumah. Elamai, you see that you can't make such an argument. So going back to our Shaila, why would you say that just because it's already Tomei, because it touched it full yom, if it's full yom touches it again, it has no impact? You see clearly that even though this rug was a Tumas medrus, it was also able to absorb the Tumas Maga medrus. On the way, Umimai Dahashim Naga Ba'azov Levasa medrus. Who said that the chash is that first it became Tumas medrus and then the Zav touched it? The Dilma, maybe what Rabbi Yosy is saying is Mekame medrus. Maybe the Zav touched it before it became medrus. So first it became Tumas Maga medrus, and then it became Tumas medrus. To have a Tumah Chamura or Tumah Kala. There everybody agrees. You don't say Sovel Tumah. You don't say it's fully saturated with Tumah. It'll become more Tumah. Because it's becoming Tumah with the Tumah Chamura after it became Tumah with the Tumah Kala. Aval Hocha, the Idi Tumah Kala, but in our Shaila, the original Tumah was because it was touched by its full yom, and the Shaila is it's going to be touched by its full yom a second time. Right, there you don't say that you could absorb the Tumah. So there maybe you would say Sovel Tumah, and that's why we have a Shaila. Let me Seifa. I'm still going to prove you wrong from the Seifa that there's no such argument of Sovel Tumah. Because the Seifa says, Moed Rabbi Yosy, Yosy agrees, B'shnei Sadinin Hamiku Polim. If you have two fabrics that were folded, Umunachin Zelza, and one is sitting on top of the other, the Yoshav Zav Alayim, and the Zav sat on it, She'elyon Tomei Medrus. The first one will be Tomei Medrus, V'atachton would be Tomei Medrus, and Tomei Maga Medrus. Now, Rashi tells us that this, it's not Rashi, the Mepharshim tells us that this whole thing that Rabbi Yosy holds, that it doesn't become Tomei Maga Medrus after it loses its Tumas medrus, that's only if the sheet was completely spread out. If it was folded over, then one part of the sheet touched the other part of the sheet. Externally, that avada will transmit Tumah. So what did Rabbi Yosy say? If you have two Zadinim, one on top of the other, and the Zav sat on top of one of them, so there, the one that the Zav stood on top is medrus, and the Tachton is Tamei medrus and Maga medrus, because the Tachton not only does the weight of the Zav sit on it, but it's also touching the top fabric. So the bottom fabric will be Tamei Maga medrus because it's touching the fabric above it. The fabric above it is Tumas medrus. But the problem is, Lema Sevel Tumah. Again, you should say it's Sava Leituma, because once it already became a Tumas Medris, the lower one, how could it become Tumas Maga Medris after that? There it's becoming Tumas Maga Medris and Tumas Medris all at one time. There you don't say Sava Leituma, because both Tumas are coming at the same time. But over here it first became Tomei because it's touched by Tful Yom, and then the next day it would have. We're talking about having the second Tumah Bichalalit. So once again, maybe you would say Sava Latuma because it's not coming at the same time. Amar Rava said, Isarein Shecholkoi V'Ovad Echad Mehen. You had an Isarein, which was the shear that you need for a mincha. Then you split it in half. And then half of it got lost. So now you need to find another half of Isarein to complete this korban mincha. So v'hivrish achar tachtov, he went and got other flour to be mashlim the remaining half of Isarein to a full Isarein. So now you have three half of Isareins, one is missing. And then v'nimtza harishon. So now you have three piles of flour, each of them are a half of Isarein, and we don't know which one is going to be used for the mincha. It's exactly the same case. It's exactly the same case. You have three little piles, each with a half of Isarein, all sitting on one big keli. What happens if nitma ovad? What if then the one that got lost, that we now found, became tamei? Ovad v'rishayin mitzarfen. I'm sorry? Well, nothing is tummy. It all started off not tummy. Right. We're missing. Yeah, that's right. Well, you're going to have to decide what is constituting the korban. So how we decide that, that's going to come out in the discussion. So Zeb Gemara nitma ovad. What if the ovad became tummy? So do we say, since it was already replaced, it's no longer part of the mincha? It's extra. Because remember we said Klei is only Metzaref masha b'soichoi if it's needed for the keli. If it's extra, it won't be Metzaref. So the question is, which one is the odd man out? So nitma ovad. Do you say, so what is the halacha? Ovad v'rishon mitzarfen. We say that the one that was lost, that was found, elbowed its way back into the picture. And now it and the original portion that never got lost are Metzaref, and mufresh ein mitzaref. The new half of Isarein that we brought into the picture is now out of the picture again because we don't need it anymore. Nitma mufresh. What if the mufresh, meaning the replacement half of Isarein, became tamei? There was a mufresh for rishon mitzarfen, but other a mitzarfen. What about nitma rishon? What if the original half that never got lost became tamei? Shnei mitzarfen. They both mitzaref because that combines both of them together. That has a shaychus of both the lost half and the replacement half. Abaye Omar, afilu nitma echad mehen nami shneien mitzarfen.
Sorry, why is the one that's nitma the joining factor? I don't get it.
Well, the question is, if a half of Yisrael became Tomei, the Tumah spreads to the other half of the korban mincha that this is the half of. The question is, which is its partner? So Zok the Gemara, Abai Amar afilu nitma echad mehen nami shnehem mitzarfen. Even if any one became tamei, they're all going to be mitzaref. So let's see Rashi. Avad rishon v'sheni, avad rishon mitzarfen v'nitma harishon machmazeh b'tzirv Klei. Mufresh shehifresh tachazeh. That's the replacement. Any mitzaref litfil imay sharei lohufresh al manas litzaref ima avod sharei shneim avudim. Never would the replacement be connected to the original that was lost, because it was always only going to be one or the other. Okay. So Zok the Gemara, Abai Amar Filu Litma Echad Mehen Nami Shnein Mitzarfen. My timer, because Kulu B'nei Biksa Da Adadininu. At the end of the day, they're all connected. As Rashi says, B'nei Bayis Echad Hein Shekula mikoyach mincha achas bo. Biksa, Rashi says, comes from two words, beiksa, which is the tight little spot. They're all in this tight little spot together. So, yes, we're not going to need all three half of Yisraelis for the mincha, but they're definitely all somewhat related. They're interconnected. Therefore, Toma touching one will impact everyone. The same thing is the guy with the kmitza. When you make the kmitza, which one is which two half of Yisraelis are the mincha? So let's see how that would work. What if the kohen went and made the kmitza from the original half of Yisrael that got lost, that was not recovered? So the halach is shiyorov, the leftover of that half of Yisrael, the rishon and the original half that was always going to be paired with, nechol, they're eaten as shirayim by the kohanim. But mufresh and nechol, the mufresh you got to destroy. Now it doesn't become chulin, because once it was set aside to be the replacement, it's not chulin anymore. It would have to be burnt. But it's not mutter to be eaten to the kohanim as shirayim, because only the shirayim mincha gets released to the kohanim. And this doesn't get that status because it's extra flour. What about kametz min hamofresh? What if the kohen made the kmitza from the replacement half? Well, then shiyor v'rishon necholim, but the ovid ain't nechol, because now the ovid was not part of the equation. What about kametz min harishon? So there are shnei mein nechol, because we don't know which one is considered part of the mincha, and therefore shirayim and may now be eaten, and which one was the odd man out. Abaya Amar afilu kametz me'echol mehen, no matter which half of Yisrael the kmitza was made from, shneyan eino nechol, none of the shirayim can be eaten. Why? My timer, kulu nami b'nei biksa dadadininu. That's Abaya's svara. We look at them that they're all combined. So they're all part of the mincha, but we know that the kmitza could only be makshir one Yisrael in order for the kohanim to eat. Here, the kmitza is connected to them all, but it can't possibly be matter all, so because of that, they'll both be asur. That is what Abaya said. Maskif lo Rav Papa. Rav Papa had a kash on him. V'shirayim dideya miya nechol. It's mashma Abaya saying that the actual half of Yisrael that the kmitza was made from, those shirayim you for sure can eat. The whole question is the shirayim of the other two halves. But according to you, Abaye, you shouldn't even be able to eat the shirayim of the half of Yisrael that you're talking about. You know why? Because the koimet still like karv. Let's have a look over here. We have a full koimet. Really, the full koimet, if you want to break it down into its pieces, half of the koimet is being matter, half of the shirayim. Half of the koimet is being matter, the other half of the shirayim. But here you have the koimet is representing all three halves, but it's not enough to go around. So not only are the other two piles shortchanged, this pile itself is shortchanged because it doesn't even have his half. It's losing 2/3. If you're going to get that granular when you're talking about flour, that's what's going to happen. You're not even going to have enough for that itself. Now I'll ask you better, how could you even be matter this koimetz? Forget about the eating of the shirayim, how could you even put this koimetz on the mizbeach? 1/3 of it is representing a part of the mincha that's not even part of the mincha. So now we're stuck. Zot Gemara, Rabbi Ashi Omar, no, we're not stuck. Because koimetz bedaita the koyin tal yumilsa. The koimetz doesn't automatically apply to everything in the pile. The koimetz will apply to whatever the kohen was mechaven when he made the kmitza. And therefore, the kohen ki kometz are Yisrael ki kometz. The kometz is not split three ways. The kometz is only on Yisrael because that was the kohen's kavanah. Even if I can't identify which Yisrael it is, but the kometz is only representing an Yisrael, and therefore it's a good kmitza, and you can put the kmitza on the mizbeach. What's the Rashi? Amar Rashi, the last two questions that were asked by Rav Papa and by Rabbi Yitzchak are not shver. The chivin do kamatz elo mino echad. Kemitzas hamincha bedaita the kohen talya. You look at the kohen's das, and that will determine what this kemitzah is representing. The kohen kikomatz adaita di soren chatu the komatz. He did not have in mind to have this kemitzah be split three ways. No, he had in mind for this komitz to work only for one isarin. So right off the bat, the komitz you could put on the mizbeach, and shiur rishon could be eaten because it's for sure covered by the komitz. Now the other two, like Abaye said, einon mechon, because we don't know which of the other two halves was the one selected by the kohen. But at the end of the day, the actual komitz you could put on the mizbeach, and the shirayim from that actual komitz the kohen could eat. It's only the sofek according to Abaye which of the other two halves are connected to this korban that will be mutter to eat, and therefore you can't eat any of them. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we finished off Chav Dalet. This time it's right on the button because the Mishnah starts at the top. Shkoyach.